an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, Traitor Spy Trilogy, Book 2 by Trudy Canavan. Chapters 1, 2, and part of 3. In these chapters, we have a new character added to the mix here, and we also find out what's going on with Lorkin and the Traitors, and things go a little bit left for Daniel. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh, I am sorry that my scheduling changes have made it so that you can't be here. I miss you, and I just want you to know that I miss you. But Martin is here in the chat. Hello. So, all right. This book begins... It's been like a couple of months since the end of the previous book. And not a lot has really changed in that time. What we get is sort of like an impression that Lorkin has been living amongst these people and trying his best to follow the rules. We find out Sania has been granted permission to roam the city at will, which part of me was kind of like, I would have liked to see that decision being made. And another part of me, it probably wasn't that exciting. So it's probably best to just begin the story with her already having that permission. And Daniel... this is something I did not expect, but it makes a lot of sense. Daniel has fallen out of favor with everybody because of the fact that he called off the search for Lorkin. And obviously he had to. He ran into Lorkin. Lorkin explained what was going on. Daniel was like, all right, I'm gonna chill, let you kind of figure this out on your end. But he couldn't tell anybody that, there's no, the whole thing is supposed to be that the traitors are so mysterious and outside of our... So he can't let them know that, oh yeah, Lorkin, I found him. He's with the traitors. They stole him, but I'm just going to let them keep him. Because that would, it's essentially what he's doing anyway by calling off the search is crying that, what's the word I want to say? Crying uncle? Basically being well, I guess you win. But it's a different thing than finding out he actually saw Lorkin and potentially could have figured out where the location was for the traitors based on that information. And he did not find that. That's what I feel like is really behind a lot of this. The Sachakans are behaving as if they're doing this purely because they're trying to help Daniel because he's an ambassador. But I think that there is a larger aspect here of them wanting to use this as an excuse to finally root out the traitors' hideout. That seems to be, this is a perfect opportunity. Everything that they have done so far has been, it seems, sort of I don't even want to say low level because they talk about people getting kidnapped or disappearing. But this is an international incident, right? That's essentially what's going on here because we are dealing with ambassadors and their the representatives from another country who were sent here in peace to exchange knowledge and information and strengthen a bond between two countries. And the traitors came in and took one of them. That's practically a declaration of war to a lot of people. I have no doubt that if there was a faction in Curalia that was like the traitors, and the Sachakans sent a ambassador and his assistant to Curalia, and the assistant was captured, I do not see the Sachakans reacting well to that. I think that would have wound up in war. The Sachakans, granted, are more prideful from what we have seen, but Daniel more than likely is the one thing standing between a war here because he has been trying to mitigate things as much as possible. So in that respect, I am kind of relieved that he is as well informed as he is, that he wound up like running into Lorkin because otherwise he might have had to call in the cavalry here, you know? As it is, all he winds up having to do really in the end is ask for a new assistant. And I don't know what the story is that he has told everybody. He has this communication with Sania that's happening, but I'm not entirely sure if Sania is like very vaguely informed, and I don't know if he's told anybody else anything serious, you know? Martin says he barely held Sania as it was. I think it was a typo and you meant told. Yeah, like he has given her very sketchy details, and I'm extremely curious what story he came up with to get a new assistant that doesn't have them all asking a whole lot of questions. That feels like it should be a really big problem. And I don't know if he's just sort of downplaying it for Lorkin's sake. If he's like trying to say, oh, I've sent him on some like private assignment, because like really when it comes down to it, that kind of is what's happening. You know, Lorkin is on a very risky mission, but it is a mission to foster further peace and communication between two nations. I don't know if I want to call the Traitors a nation, but they kind of are. So one could say that Daniel could tell them that, and it wouldn't be a lie. It would just be really minimizing the danger that he's in. And let's see. Martin says, Sania talked to Lorkin directly via the blood ring, so I assume the guild knows exactly what happened. Now that's interesting. I don't know why you would assume that, because Sania doesn't tell the guild a whole lot. You know, she keeps a lot of her cards close to her chest. So maybe she did, but I am not totally certain of that. I don't know. Maybe I will find out more about how much she has shared with everybody a little bit later, because it kind of got lost. What happened to Lorkin was sort of subsumed by everything that went on with Sari and Skellin and the roet. So not as much attention was paid to what was happening with Lorkin at the end of the last book. And I don't know how much energy they have particularly put into trying to find out what's going on with him, you know? But anyway, so let's begin with part 1, chapter 1, The Stonemaker's Caves, which begins a part of the story that I find kind of hilarious. So what this is, Ashleigh, I was just saying that I missed you and I was sorry you couldn't come. I'm delighted you're here. Welcome. So The Stonemaker's Caves, this chapter is basically all about Lorkin and his new dude friend, who I can't remember his name, but I'm looking for it. It starts with an E. He is being brought to see the Stonemaker Caves, where they do all of this like magic imbued into these gems that he has never heard about before. And I really enjoy Ivar, that's his name. I really enjoy the fact that basically him and Ivar know that they are doing something that the traitor leaders would not approve of. They are fully fucking aware. They're, but it's not explicitly against the rules. And Ivar, honestly, I love his attitude so much. Basically, Ivar's whole vibe is just, I don't know what you're so upset about. I did exactly as I was asked to do, no more, no less. If you have a problem with that, that really seems like you messed up a little bit, doesn't it? Maybe you should have been more specific and thought that through a tiny bit. And frankly, I'm here for it. The thing with the Traitors that's so frustrating, but really well done, in my opinion, is that you understand what they're aiming for, right? They want a female-driven society in direct, not opposition, but basically in direct response to the overwhelming patriarchy of S'chaka, which is so understandable. And they want equality in direct response to S'chaka's slavery. Both of these things are absolutely understandable, and I applaud them and support them. However, you can't have, like, my worry began at the end of the last book when we see how many men they have living there. And I found out that, like, they basically have, like, a dude dorm, and all the guys stay there unless they are selected by one of the women to be a companion. And then they will, like, move into the cave that she is living in. Right there, that makes me real nervous, because, like, any time that you have a group of people that is oppressed, and they kind of are, they are not given the rights that all of the other women are given. They are not taught magic. All of the male magicians are naturals who have not been trained and are occasionally simply left to die because of their own magic, like them losing control of it, which is really fucking brutal. That is cold-blooded, in my opinion. So these dudes are low-key oppressed. It doesn't seem like they're suffering terribly day to day, but they are not being given the same agency as the women. And I had really thought, when we are seeing way back the formation of the Traitors and how this all came to be, I expected them to not keep any men permanently in their community. Now, obviously, this is not sustainable. And I think I talked a little bit about, what happens when you have children and some of them are male, and you don't just kick them out or like send them out to be adopted or whatever. And how do you go out and take lovers and then come back without being followed or without anybody noticing? And the answer is you take them to your hideout and don't let them leave again. And that is something that Ivar is like talking about with Lorkin. He's like, listen, technically I am allowed to leave. And he puts in quotes. He's like, because they never explicitly said I'm not allowed to leave. I am not under the same like rules as you, but really I am not allowed to leave either. If I tried, they would have a real fucking problem with that. And I want to know if these dudes are aware of what they're getting into when they come here. How many of these guys just were after a roll in the hay with some girl, and she's like, ha 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 ha, I mean, I'll totally do you, but you can't leave again. And they're like, oh, that's fine, chick. And then they find out, no, that is dead ass serious, 100%. You are here to stay forever. I am so curious at the way this all started for a lot of these dudes. I'm sure plenty are just born here, and I don't know how much, like, when the Traitors are started, there is a fair number of women. I assume that it's possible to interbreed without there being a ton of overlap of genetics here. But you have to bring in some new blood, probably frequently. And I really want to know what kind of deal they cut. Maybe some of these guys had been slaves and they were just like, well, I'd rather go somewhere that I can't leave than stay here and be a slave. And I would get that. But anyway, I just love Ivar's energy, which is just sort of like low-key chaos energy. He just sort of wants to fuck with them because he's resentful, understandably, about the position that he has been forced to take here. And he wants to remind them they are not infallible. And he wants to remind everyone else that they are not infallible, which is just as important. This is the kind of thing that, like, when you talk about revolutions and making an example, A lot of people think that the point is to like win right away, or to at least achieve a victory of some kind quickly. Not necessarily. It could just be as simple as everybody thinks these people are untouchable, and I will prove that is not true. It's difficult, and it's maybe not wholly effective immediately, but they're people, and they can be fucked with. And Ivar, I am like, all of the men of this community seem to be very much in support of what him and Lorkin did. And later on, there's kind of a crowd growing as these dudes have started to like bring small gifts and bring them food and things, because they all admire the fact that these two have kind of given all the traitor rulers the finger. I'm not mad about that at all. You know, it just feels like this is something that really you should expect when you decide that there is going to be a lower class. And that's what's so frustrating, is that they wanted to make everybody be equal. But now they've got a couple of different classes. They have the men who are at the bottom. They have the women who are not rulers, who are given rights that the men aren't, but they are still not, they're granted a vote, but they are not in charge. And there's a very strong pattern here to suggest that a vote isn't really like, I get the impression that some of these traitor rulers, they put the show out there of putting things to a vote, but they are able to manipulate things behind the scenes before the vote or after the vote so that they can still sort of get their way. I haven't seen like a particular example of that yet, but it feels like that's coming. We are going to start to see some real manipulation because they are splitting. You know, there are two parties here now that each want very, very different things for the traitors. That can only go so far before either somebody capitulates or it totally divides. And you wind up having, like, basically political parties. It's inevitable that when you begin to grow to a certain point, you are going to have people with a different idea for the future than others. Pardon me, I'm going to adjust my mic so I don't have to lean forward quite so much. Ashleigh says, I can't imagine in a society run by women in reality turning to oppressing men. Sure, it obviously happens in reverse in reality, but I can't imagine a group of women escaping that oppression and then imposing that on their own sons. Now, that's an interesting question, Ashleigh, because I would agree with you, except that it's been hundreds of years since the Traitors were established. So, originally, I am certain that the first few generations, it wasn't like this. But once you start to like grow further and further apart from who founded you and the ideals with which they did so, it's going to change. And your viewpoints are going to become much more black and white about things. It's sort of like, not to bring up an extremely controversial issue, but let's talk about the Second Amendment in the United States, which is the right to bear arms. That was put into place as a means of fighting against tyranny, a tyrannical government, because of the fact that the United States had separated from Britain and so had very recently had to divide themselves from a tyrannical ruler via force. And so they put something very specific regarding that into the Constitution because they were trying to anticipate potentially Britain taking over again or somebody else representing them trying to establish authoritarian. What they meant when they wrote that is not where we are now, which is people who have semi-automatic weapons by the truckload in their basements. That's not what they fucking meant. But it was vague enough in the way that it was worded and created that as hundreds of years have passed, it has been perverted. Technology has changed. People's viewpoints have gotten muddled. And so now it looks completely different than, in my opinion, how it was intended. I think that's probably what happened here with the Traitors. They wanted women to be in charge because they felt that women had been so oppressed. And that became slowly over time a much more extreme, well, men can't be trusted. We can't let them have a say. We have to keep them separate from everything. Men can't even be given like training in magic, and gradually turned into this oppressive version that I don't think the original Traitors would be pleased with at all were they to see it. Similarly, I don't know, but I would guess that if the Founding Fathers saw people protesting in the streets about, police brutality, they would not really be thrilled about seeing police claiming they are functioning on behalf of the United States, firing tear gas into a trapped crowd. Things get perverted and corrupted and shaped according to people who want power. And whether it's a society made of women or men as the ruling sex, people want power from either gender. And that is going to be a factor in how they decide to write laws and how they allocate tasks and responsibilities and secrets and trust, So I definitely agree with you in principle, Ashleigh, because I think that it's a really common misconception among like men's rights activists that they look at women who are trying to fight for equality. And what they hear is that women want to subjugate men the way that men have always subjugated women. And that's not what we mean. But I could see if women who broke off and did their own thing after hundreds of years, I could see that message getting very muddled. She says, I'm not sure that I think the slave-owning Founding Fathers would really give a damn about a corrupt police force, which is mostly turned against people of color. Yeah, that is fair. I think if we framed it when we were talking to the Founding Fathers as, look, this is an authority, and they are firing against their own people and turned them into pure tyranny and didn't talk about the people of color thing, they would be righteously enraged. But yeah, as soon as you bring up, and they're mostly against, black folks and people. Oh, Siri's over here. Siri is so nosy. Then they probably would begin to lose concern and interest. You're fair about that. So anyway, I think it's really interesting and well done to have this traitor group, which sounded like such a mecca of feminist ideals in the previous book when we were, previous to the ambassador's mission. I mean, I love that we read about it and we're like, oh, this is a great idea. This could be something so amazing. And then we fast forward a few hundred years and we find out not quite. And Lorkin, to be fair, is very willing to give them the credit they're due. He's like, they are doing better than T'Chaka. They don't have slaves. And granted, the men are oppressed, but they aren't oppressed in the way that the women are in T'Chaka, where they are being raped and beaten and forced to just endure that. These men are being denied rights, but they aren't being physically, abused, So that is an improvement, true. But it could be so much better. And I am just extremely interested to see how this works, because Lorkin is coming into this as an outsider, first of all, from Curelia. Second of all, a man. 2 strikes. Third of all, the son of a man who betrayed them all. 3 strikes? Ooh, not great. So I imagine that he's going to be looking at the situation and wanting to help and make this society better for these men. And it's not going to go over super well. And I don't really know. I mean, I'm glad that it seems like he has sort of teamed up with another man who has, been, I was going to say is native, but I don't know that he's native there. He may not have been born there. But at least this man is part of the community, and has been for a while. So it feels less like Lorkin just swooping in and imposing his idea of what's better on these guys who are like, but this is just how it works. It's clear the men of this community are not satisfied with things, and they are going to utilize Lorkin, if they can, towards making some points. And I am hopeful that Lorkin will be involved in improving things for these guys, but not necessarily spearheading it. Let him do his own whole, Kiralian healing gemstone thing, and let Ivar be the one that manages the futures of the men of his own group, Anyway, I'm just all over the place talking about this today. I'm literally on the first page, and I just started talking about shit that happens all over the place. Meanwhile, Lorkin is still super into Tyvara. And even though it appears like a month has passed, Tyvara is no closer to jumping his bones, and he is extremely sad about it. It's really funny. It turns out, Ivar says something a little bit later about oh man, I would totally love to bang that chick. And Lorkin has to be cool because there is absolutely no claim on her at all. He has nothing. She saved his life. He has the hots for her. That's it. There's no bond between them. Nobody is spoken for. So he just sort of has to be yeah, me too. And pretend that it doesn't make him insanely jealous. And Tyvara, for her part, it feels like she's a little interested in Lorkin as well. There's a certain warmth between them at first, but things go south pretty rapidly. I'm getting ahead of myself as usual, though. So he is first has to go to the, the infirmary. And as he's heading over there, there's a mention of him saying, "Excuse me," to a couple of children as he's squeezing between them, and how they kind of give him this vaguely amused look. And we hear that his manners are very puzzling to all of them. And it's a weird thing here because I assumed that was going to be a thing of Sachaka because of slaves. But apparently that's still true here, even though they don't have slaves. And it says, the Ashaki and their families, the powerful free people of the lowlands, had too great a sense of entitlement to feel the need to express gratitude for the services of others, and thought thanking slaves for doing what they had no choice in doing was ridiculous. Though Traitors did not keep slaves, and their society was supposed to be equal, they hadn't developed a good sense of manners. At first, Lorkin had tried to do as they did, but he did not want to lose his habit of being polite to the extent that his own people would find him rude should he ever return to Kiralia. Let the traitors think of me as strange. That's better than ungrateful or aloof. This is the kind of thing that I know would trip me up really bad. I know that a lot of people at maybe listening to this show or hearing the way that I get confrontational in comments and, on Twitter would probably put me down as a very aggressive personality. And don't get me wrong, that's absolutely true. But when it comes to service people or strangers on the street, I tend to be much further in the other direction, where I will make every effort to keep a service worker from having to do anything. I have worked so many jobs in retail, in restaurants, that knowing what people in those kinds of positions go through makes me extremely overeager to make things easy on them. So what happens is I wind up going too far in the other direction where somebody like gets my order wrong or does something poorly, and I just decide to take it. Unless it's really egregious, I am kind of like, well, I guess I'll just deal. You know, the other day I got a coffee. It was a completely wrong order. Did I go back and tell them, oh, actually, I ordered this hot, and you asked me specifically, and I said hot, and I remember you being surprised because it was hot outside, and you still made it cold? I just drank the cold one. That's all I did, because I don't care enough to, like, bother somebody. And being part of a community where it is not the culture to be nice enough to even say excuse me as you like push your way between people, you're in their way. Like, I just don't understand. You just do it and you don't say anything to them or acknowledge the fact that you're like interrupting, or I don't understand. How do you function that way and not feel like a dickhead? It just blows my mind. So this moment, I really like stopped and thought about it. I was like, damn, I just don't know what I would do. Like they would just be laughing at me all the fucking time because, I mean, the slaves, that is bad enough. But when you're in a culture where they don't even have slaves, so that's not even part of the reasoning behind the way they behave. I don't know what to do with that. You know, this is supposed to be an equal society. And so there's I don't know, just a weird thing. And I agree with his assessment that basically he doesn't want to get into bad habits and then go home again and everybody be like, what the fuck is your problem, when he doesn't say excuse me after shoving between them. And I would also be afraid of getting used to being this way. There's a lot of like, I've been reading a couple of different things lately where people are impersonating nobility. And that is also a thing, is that as like a nobleman, if we're talking about, you know, turn of the century England, when servants did things for you, you could thank them. It wasn't looked on the way it is in this, where everybody's like, why are you saying thank you? But it is sort of like, you say thank you in a sort of dismissive way, as if to say, that's your job. I appreciate you completing it, but I'm not pretending that this is anything outside of what is expected of you, you know? And even that, I think I might have a little bit of trouble with. We all like joke about how much we would love to have somebody coming and cooking all of our meals and cleaning our house and all of that stuff. And while maybe eventually I would get used to it and this would be no issue for me anymore, I have a really hard time imagining that and being cool with it, and it not being an incredible amount of anxiety to have other people around your home completing basic tasks for you. I just don't like the idea of it. So anyway, the thing that's so sort of funny here is that he is entering the infirmary and Kalia is so fucking combative with him. She is looking for anything that she can kind of yell at him about, give him extra work over. And so he has to be extremely careful. He can't run in there because he's hurrying, because that gives this impression that he really wants to get the hell out of there and that he's anxious to leave, which means that she will give him some extra work to drag the day out. But if there isn't enough for him to do, he can't make it look like he's just hanging around, because she will give him work that is extra and unnecessary just so that he's got busy work, and it's often going to be something purposefully unpleasant just to kind of make it nasty for him. But if he like comes in all slow and languid, then it's going to be as if he has no urgency about his work and doesn't care. So he has to be so careful about what kind of face he presents to her. And he comes in and he's carrying this box of supplies, and she asks him, why do you never think to use your powers? Because he is carrying it manually, not using magic. And he doesn't answer her, but we find out between this and sleep, these are a couple of things that, because the Traitors don't have a handle on healing magic, they do not fully appreciate the effects of failing to do any sort of manual labor, like carrying a box, and they do not fully appreciate the effects of failing to get adequate sleep. Now, I know that it's a hugely common thing in this day and age for people to not get enough sleep. I am certain that I technically don't get enough either. I get more than a lot of people, especially because I don't have children. So I count my blessings on that. But I got to tell you guys, I have done some reading recently on the importance of sleep to your overall health. And it is startling. And I have been doing this weightlifting program for about a month and a half and have started to see huge improvements in overall performance regarding like the amount of weight that I'm able to lift on certain exercises. And I was interested in like furthering my understanding of how that worked. And I looked into it from some professionals who like compete in tournaments and whatnot. And the three biggest factors are what is your nutrition like? How much rest are you getting? And this is not to do with sleep. The rest is simply how long are you allowing your body to recover from intense training sessions? And 3, sleep. How's your sleep? How much sleep are you getting? What are you doing to ensure that you are actually going to sleep when you get into bed versus getting into bed and reading for 6 hours and then sleeping for 2? What are you doing to make sure that the sleep that you get is uninterrupted, or that you are waking up without having to jump into your day head first in the first for 15 minutes that you're out of bed? How are you preparing for the next day so that when you get into bed, your brain isn't thinking over the 11 things you have to do first thing in the morning, because you have that written down somewhere and you don't have to think about it, or you have your clothes prepared and you don't have to worry about what you're wearing tomorrow. All of these things. And it, like I said, these are professionals who do training and like competitions for a living. And they just keep saying one of the number one factors in people not making the advancements in training that they think they should is that they are not getting adequate sleep. They'll think, I need to train harder. They'll think, I need to cut back on what I'm eating. And almost every time, it's just they need to sleep. And that's it. And it's such a simple thing, and yet they are unwilling to fucking do it because we do not value that. We don't understand it. Like, the whole reason for the human body needing to sleep is something that we have been studying for literal years. The way it works, why it's easier for some people than others, ways to make it easier. All of this is like, and we still don't really get it. And this I found extremely interesting here. And I'm wondering if this is going to be a factor. Because she just gets snappy with him when he tells her, if you didn't get any sleep, that's not good for you. She says, don't be stupid. I'm more than capable of doing without sleep. This has to be done now by someone who knows what they're doing. And, oh man, that is just, I have said that shit, man. This needs to get done. I don't know what to tell you. And the truth is, so much of the time, it doesn't. We tell ourselves this absolutely needs to get done, but really, it doesn't. Nobody will die if we don't get it done. Nobody will even be hurt. Somebody might be mad or annoyed. And really, who cares? Too bad. I am a human being who requires rest. And it is even a cultural thing, especially in the United States, among blue-collar workers, to wear it as a badge of honor how little sleep you got the night before. and to kind of compete with other people you work with, to be like, ooh, who got the least sleep last night? Who stayed up the latest? Who worked the most last week? I put in 12 hours yesterday and I didn't get home until 10. And then I got up at 6 this morning and came right back in. I'm such a hard worker. And it's so silly because fucking capitalism does not care. We out here acting like putting in extra hours, people are going to notice and really think what great workers we are. And that's going to matter. And we're going to get a raise. No. They don't care about us. They are willing to suck any amount of productivity out of us that they can. And then once we are a dried up, saddened husk, toss us to the side. They don't care. But we are still out here trying to act as if this is something to be proud of. It's really, honestly, very sad and deluded. But here we are. Martin says, you say that to two people watching you at 1 a.m. Martin, I don't know what you're referring to, but I don't like it. Ashleigh says, I'd never boast about that. Here, I think it comes across as irresponsible and possibly not caring enough about your job to come in at your best. See, and this is why I said that that was like an American thing, because I have not seen that sort of thing in a lot of other countries. I hear vague, like, what's the word I want? References to Japanese work culture being something like that you are expected to just be there every waking hour of the day. But a lot of other countries don't seem to be that way. And it's just Americans do not value rest and are not taught to value rest. That is why the whole like self-care industry is starting to be such a thing. Because we are all just beginning to wake up to the way that we've been lied to our whole lives about how working extra hard will make sure that we're extra successful. When in fact, that's simply not how the system is set up. They lie to you to tell you that so that you will try harder, but they do not actually reward that behavior. They're just giving you false hope so that you kill yourself on their behalf and they can exploit that, frankly. And it's just a lie that we have all bought. And it's honestly, again, it's pitiful. So anyway, he says that guild healers knew how damaging lack of sleep could be to the body because they could sense the effects. Not knowing how to heal with magic, traitors had never sensed their error and believed a good night's sleep was an unnecessary indulgence. Yeah, I mean, if you don't really understand the reasoning for it, then why would you value it? It makes total sense. And he says that he didn't try to convince them of what they didn't know because he didn't think it was tactful to explain that they don't understand a thing that is so closely related to healing when that is the whole thing about what his father betrayed them, and so we get a little bit like of the recap on everything here. And we find out about how male magicians are not really taught how to handle their magic and they're not trained. And he wonders if he had known how to use black magic, whether they would even have allowed him in at all, because he has knowledge that maybe he could hand off to the other men that he's staying with. So he goes and sees Ivar, and Lorkin is sort of like taken aback by the fact that Ivar's like, all right, let's go eat. And he's like, did you change your mind? Do you still want to do the thing? And Ivar's like, oh, no, I definitely do. But some of the stoneworkers are still in there, so we're going to wait for them to go. And Lorkin's sort of like, okay, but I mean, this is supposed to be like not against the rules, so why are we waiting for them to go? And Ivar's like, I know that they will try and stop us, but we have plausible deniability. So, and honestly, absolutely, he's handling this 100% correct. So they eat, they go into the caves where they, deal with these gems, and we find out about the variety of them that they have. So first of all, we've got this whole like alternative speaking stone thing. It's not like a bloodstone, although they have those too. But the bloodstones you can see another person's thoughts and you can't block them out in any way. They have full on access to your entire brain. These other stones that they are creating, they can only speak one-to-one. So they are directly linked like a couple of tin cans with a string. But you only transmit whatever it is that you are trying to transmit as you would when speaking. That seems extremely critical to me. Like, this is a hugely advantageous thing, and I have no doubt that this is going to come into play later when things start to go down and be absolutely fucking crucial to their communications. That's dope, and I'm very interested. And obviously, he's also very interested. Also, and this hadn't even really occurred to me, but Lorkin's particularly interested in the Store Stones because if they have those, they don't have to rely on black magic. They can just pour magic into these stones and have a variety of them to access for extra magic rather than needing to rely on a living person sacrificing either blood or just power through touch. And it's not only the advantage of not having to rely on another human being, but you can just keep pouring magic into it. Like, as time goes on, you could build a store of magic that is insane. And it would be far more than what you would get out of individual people. So that didn't occur to me, but that is a pretty good point, and that seems actually kind of scary. And I'm a little bit worried about it if there are people out there who still have this knowledge, because I think they're called the Durna. I can't remember the name of the people that accused the Traitors of stealing the knowledge about this, but allegedly these Traitors have outstripped them in terms of their technology. And I'm wondering if that's exactly true or not. You know, we'll see if we ever like venture into that area. So let's see. I'm trying to find what the other one, because that speaking stone was one of the ones that really got my attention. Oh, right. They have duplicator stones, which basically the vibe I get from these stones are that they're sort of like microchips, and you imprint a code on them, essentially. And the duplicator stones, essentially, you finally finish your code and you get it done correctly in this one stone. And then what? You have to do it all over again in this new one? No. Duplicator stone does it for you and gets it done correctly and puts it into another stone. So you can do a bunch of the same kind really quickly and easily. Very, very cool. And then let's see. Duna. Not Durna. I was close, though. Oh, right. The mind blocker stones. I forgot about that. They have stones that are meant for creating a barrier, a physical barrier, like damming water or holding back rock falls, which is pretty cool. So let's see. And what do those gems do? I don't know exactly. I suspect that's an experiment, some sort of weapon for the city's defense if we're ever invaded. And Lorkin is real curious about that, but of course, that's the one thing that he really can't be pushy and ask about because it's going to look bad. Weapon stones have to do things that a magician can't do. For someone with little skill or training, or a magician who has run out of strength, I'm hoping they make one's strike more accurate. I wasn't much good at battle training, so if we are ever attacked, I'll need all the help I can get. And Ivar comments on the fact that Lorkin calls higher magic black magic. Lorkin says black is a color of danger and power in Kyralia. So you've said. Ivar looked away, and I'm just like, what's that about, Ivar? He seems really focused on that. I'm like, I feel like you've got opinions there. But then they wind up getting caught. The woman that they run into is named Chava. And she's obviously like, you two know fucking better than this. Come on. And Ivar's like, what do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. And eventually they get spoken to officially. And Kalia has to admit that there is no rule, that they can't be punished. But now they are putting into effect that Lorkin is not allowed in these stone-making caves without one of the traitors with him. And it feels like he got some of what he wanted with getting to see this, but, you know, he hasn't really learned how to make any of them, of course. So I'm wondering if they will ever let him in here again. Like, what will he have to do to ensure that he has their trust? And Ivar, being, you know, the one who led him and showed him the way and explained what each of these stones did, I am wondering what the hell he is going to, like, they can say you're not getting punished and still punish you in their own way. You know, they wind up like keeping them separated from everybody else and for a couple of days before they are taken in and essentially given their like hearing. So who knows if they decide to just make their lives a little bit more difficult. And Tavara, she is pretty like aggressive with Lorkin, being like, what the fuck were you doing? And when he doesn't want to tell her, she starts to just get up and leave. And he calls her back and manages to just be like, what's going on with you? I haven't seen you. Are you okay? And it turns out they've got her working in the sewers because it's a punishment. But she's like, honestly, I don't even mind it that much. It's just really boring. So that's probably the thing that's going to start to get to me in the end. But yeah, that's about it for Tavara in this section. Oh, and Ashleigh, I think you missed it when I started, but I didn't go through all of chapter 3 because it would have put me like 10 pages over. So I stopped partway through chapter 3 after Lorkin's POV ends and we start into Daniel. That was where I stopped. I think it was like 48 pages or something. So then we go to Daniel, who, like I said, he has fallen out of favor because he has just given up on the search for Lorkin and nobody understands why he's done that. And it just sort of looks like he's caving to the traitors and it's just sort of shameful. Achadi tries to be like, some of these guys think that you're sacrificing and it's really noble. But there's a real sense to me that Achadi's trying to just like make him feel a little bit better. And maybe Achadi is spreading around to people, well, don't you think it's a little bit noble, and trying to plant the idea in their minds because he's into Daniel. And it's so funny to me because there's this moment here later. It was both interesting and a little worrying that this man was the only one who was still able to visit. Was Achadi immune to such social rules, or was it something else? Is he visiting because his interest in me is more than political? Of course he is, Daniel! Sweetie! He literally was like, I would like to fuck you if you're down. At the end of the last book. What more does he fucking need to say to you? He just straight up said that shit. It's no question. Come on. Get on the fucking page, kid. So, anyway, this all gets thwarted anyway, because it turns out that fucking Tayend is the new fucking ambassador for Eileen. Tayend is here. Oh, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all. I have been very salty about how things went with Tayend from the last book. And him being inserted into this whole fucking situation, pun intended, when Daniel was considering, well, maybe I will break up with him and be with this other person. Way to fucking cockblock, man. You're out here apparently, like, there seems to be a sort of understanding on Daniel's part that Tayend is fucking around on him. And he's just sort of dealing with it because he doesn't really know how to end things between them. So I wasn't about to be like judgmental about him cheating on Tayend at all, because it seems like y'all are essentially entering into an open relationship in your way. Granted, you need to actually talk about that, but I don't feel like Tayend's going to be super pissed because I feel like he doesn't seem to see Daniel as a partner anymore. But yeah, now Tayend is here fucking throwing a wrench in the works, and I am not happy about this at all. I'm here for the drama. Don't get me wrong. I love mess. But I just really hate this for Daniel because he is such an upright person and really conscious of like doing the right thing by a person that he has a history with, even if they haven't been doing the right thing on his behalf. And to see him put in this position where he has to juggle the relationships that are professional along with something that was maybe going to be personal in front of a person that he already has a personal interest in or with. And I'm guessing Tyenn might be a little bit less discreet than Daniel and might start getting involved with people in front of Daniel as well out here. I don't know. And like Tyenn had wanted to come and Daniel said no, like obviously feeling like he kind of wanted to get away. And it just feels really petty to me. Tyenn isn't here because he gives a shit about being an ambassador. Tyenn just wants to do what Tyenn wants, you know? And it feels like it's just so childish. I'm worried about how he's going to be. So we go to Sania, and it turns out Skellin has basically gone underground and nobody has been able to find him. But his roet sellers are fucking everywhere and they are messing Ceri's life up. Like, he keeps on, as he puts it, dealing with them, and they are continuing to pop up other places and sell anyway. And he's sort of mystified because, like, he's using tactics that have proven effective in the past, and it has seemed always to be like they learned their lesson and they're too afraid now. But whatever's going on with Skellin, they seem more afraid of Skellin than they do of Ceri. And they're still cropping up and pushing their luck over and over again. And she says we should do something that Skellin has to deal with personally, that his allies and workers can't decide for him. We'll find out how long it takes to get a reaction, and that might tell us if he is in Imardin or not. And Ceri's like, maybe, but we're going to need to really brainstorm what we can do that isn't going to put people in danger. And they're in the middle of this conversation when Ceri's looking over her shoulder at a doorknob that's like moving, and this person's trying to sneak into the room, but she's got it magically locked. So they can't get in, but obviously somebody's trying to do something. And when she finally does open the door, it turns out to be a roet addict. I don't know that she knows this guy's name. I don't think this is somebody that she recognizes. But essentially, they have roet here that is used to wean people off. And he is trying to sneak in and steal some. And when she tells him that he can't have any, or she tells him first, we don't keep it here. And I don't know if she's telling the truth. I assume she is, because she has no real reason to lie. But he clearly thinks she's lying. And he flips out and begins to, like, attack her. And she manages to hold him off her using some magic until the other healers come and, like, drag him away. But he is really fucked up. And it's honestly so sad. Like, I just feel really bad for this guy. And I'm wondering if there isn't some magical element to the roet that is causing this extra layer of, like, behavior with the addiction, you know? And don't get me wrong, I know that this is perfectly plausible behavior in our non-magical world with plenty of different drugs. But because of the themes of these books, I wonder if that's a factor in this. So at this point, he's being dragged away, and one of the healers sort of stops and turns and looks at her, and she recognizes Dorian, who is Rothan's son, who we haven't seen for a minute. I feel like we saw him in one of the very first chapters of, like, the last book, and then never again, which is sort of a strange thing. But he is trying to get information out of Sania on how to treat roet addiction, as it turns out. And there are people in his village that are addicted at this point after coming and visiting the city and getting their hands on some. And she's a little bit intrigued at the fact that he is free to treat the drug users in a way that people who are in the city are not, because it's considered a waste of magic. So she asks if he tried to heal them, and he says yes, but he had the same sort of issue that she did, where he thought he had successfully cured them, but they are still experiencing cravings. At least one of them is. And she says, well, clearly they should not use it ever again. A lot of them say that keeping very busy helps them to ignore the cravings they have. And some of them drink, but the drinking, they need to do like a lot of it. Otherwise, it doesn't really help. And she is wondering whether or not, because she's essentially starting to be like, I know that I shouldn't hope for this problem to get worse, but the guild is not taking it seriously. And I don't really know what to do to convince them that this is a genuine problem, other than let it grow out of control, which it's not like she has a choice, and then show them what kind of scale we're dealing with here. And he asks her like how big she thinks the problem actually is. But she is hesitant to even really tell him because she doesn't really know who's using. She is aware that Skellin is probably using the one of the other guild magicians, and so he will be influenced. Like, basically, if there's a person with a vested interest in keeping roet in the city, she has to be really careful about what she brings up regarding fighting against it, because they could undermine her somehow. So she has to keep herself to herself and tell him that she doesn't really know. And she's annoyed that she can't really tell anybody, and considers talking to Regin about it, or Regin. But Regin has been kind of weird lately and seems like really distracted and not particularly invested in things the way he had been, which she thinks is because he has lost interest in his search. And I'm wondering if there's some intrigue here that he's involved in regarding roet, or regarding, like, is his son addicted now? I don't know. But yeah, and then, oh man, I'm out of time, but we get a brief look at a new character named Lilia. And Lilia is like a slightly upper tier Loey, who, you know, her parents were servants for a well-known and respected family. So she isn't nobility, but she comes from like respectable background versus people who are, you know, literally the children of like gutter trash. And there is a girl that she makes eye contact with named, I think, Naki. Yeah. And Naki like gives her a smile and then comes and sits with her. And I am extremely interested in whether Lilia is about to like have a lesbian relationship with Naki. And I will tell you what, I am 100% here for it. Fingers crossed. But Naki is obviously into Lilia. Like, she sees her, smiles, gets up, walks across the room, and is like, what's up? And that's pretty much everything of Lilia's point of view. So that is the end of the section. Next book is for Friday anyhow, so I'll get to hear your thoughts on the rest of the chapter soon. Oh, good. Yay! All right. Well, thank you, Ashleigh, for commissioning this, and thank you to you and Martin for coming to the chat. I appreciate you all very much. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.